Nice, actually. They've become a regular time where we get to see one another as a sector at a time when we're not able to be together physically as much. So it's really such a lovely experience to see you all, and we're really grateful for your interest in our webinars as they go on. As you know, this webinar is one of a series of webinars that Sing Ireland has been running that responds to the ever-changing environment that singing groups in Ireland find themselves in and across the world during this pandemic. This evening, we will briefly touch upon guidance and the reality of restrictions that are in place until the 13th of September, and also upon the newest, very briefly, just to mention and touch upon the newest international research that is coming to the fore in relation to group singing. However, this evening's session, we've brought you a lot of research over the previous webinars, and this evening's session is intended to be extremely practical and to give advice to singing groups on how or what they might do over the coming months. A lot of the advice we will seek to give this evening will be examples of online methodologies as well as what can be done face-to-face. I'd like to firstly mention that the current restrictions that are in place until the 14th of September, that those restrictions what we're imagining in some of the face-to-face suggestions is that those suggestions will be geared towards face-to-face meetings, hopefully after the 13th of September, starting from the 14th of September, and some easing of restrictions. Of course, that's the unknown at this point, but I think a lot of the face-to-face discussion we'll mention and suggestions we bring this evening will have that in mind. So with the severe restrictions that are in place at the moment, a lot is curtailed, as you'll all know. So just to reiterate that at the moment, we have in a singing group can only be made up of 6 people indoors and 15 people outdoors. And that means that many groups are just not in a position to meet. There are some exceptions to these rules, I know. Some notable exceptions being art venues, galleries, theatres and churches. However, live music events have officially not been allowed to return, given a concern by NPHET that these music events may be associated with congregations of people through alcohol and so on, consumption and so on. However, those live events are quite different to the sort of community and local singing group meetings that those in singing groups across the country would be undertaking. We have been making the case to government for a different interpretation on events for community groups, particularly when they can undertake risk assessment and resulting risk mitigation measures. We would argue that singing groups may be able to meet in a controlled environment to some extent. However, at present, the restrictions are very much pointing to the fact that very few singing groups, as I've said, can meet until the 14th of September. And that will very much depend after that point as to what sort of easing of restrictions there are. I'd also like to specifically mention group singing in schools. It's a question we've got a lot and something we're very interested in. In schools, there are very different rules to the rest of society, given that the nature of gatherings in school can't necessarily adhere to the overall numbers that are set out as restricted across other societal gatherings. The most recent and relevant studies from international research are the UK Perform study. Many of you may know this through the work of consultant ENT, Dr. Declan Costello. And another very relevant study is a Swedish study primarily from academics from Lund University in Sweden. Each of these studies compared the release of aerosols and droplets when singing versus speaking. And the main findings, there are many findings, and I'm not going to summarize as we don't want to get lost in the research data today. We're very happy to share all of that separately, but the main findings are that PPE in general make a big difference to the spread of aerosols and droplets, that masks should be worn, and they make a considerable difference. There's also been a lot of consternation around a finding that singing when it happens quietly is safer, because when it's loud, and compared to singing, speaking actually in a loud way, if a group is together and they're speaking loudly, the aerosols that are emitted are high. The level of aerosol that's emitted is high. And it's the same when singing. And I suppose the consternation arises from the fact that part of the recommendation would seem to be that people should sing softly, and that might go against vocal production best practice and all of those kind of things. So, but the fact is, scientifically, they are seeing that when people speak more softly or sing more softly, the aerosol spread is considerably less. I would say in the classroom situation, though, that to think about whether students ever get loud whilst they're speaking during the day. And if that's the case, and I can only imagine that it is, then those occasions have been shown to spread aerosols in the same way that singing will. So it's then about comparative risk and how you can mitigate the danger. So to answer some of the questions that have come to us, we certainly feel that at secondary school level, masks should be worn when singing, and that is the case in secondary schools. Masks are being asked for. However, we would also recommend it, as difficult as it is, at primary level. And we know entirely that at primary level, given that masks are not required, that is a very difficult ask and may not be possible. But again, if we are erring on the side of caution, as we've mentioned before, we would recommend them. We would also say that 2 meter social distancing is something we would recommend. However, each classroom environment in each school is very different throughout the country, with lots of classroom situations and school situations where 2 meters isn't possible, and actually that 1 meter distancing between desks has been advocated by the Department of Education where that's not possible, and I know in many instances that's not even possible. So our thinking is that you have to take the risks that are already being undertaken across all schools, across all school activity into account. So not just singing, but when you've got that context where speaking loudly is also a risky endeavor, I think in that context you have to make decisions on whether to sing or not. So if classes are allowed to speak at a high level, and this goes, by the way, right across all singing groups, but because schools are very much to the fore at the moment given their return, I wanted to address it straight away. But we need to think about how quietly we gather as when we're speaking, and then how that ties out to what we do singing wise as well. I'm just going to share screen for a minute to talk through the format of the rest of the session for today. So as you know, what can singing groups do now is where our focus in. I've talked a little bit about group singing in Ireland as of September 2020, and about updates on the sector and some research I've mentioned, but again, don't want to get into the body of that too much. In a moment, I will turn to a video that Lily is going to share just of Declan Costello. We're just going to have a short excerpt from some of the findings there as the only research data from today, and then we're going to go to some guests who've joined us. And again, we've really looked to practical examples today. So thankfully, Tom Doyle of CIT Cork School of Music will join us, a lecturer in conducting there, and I'll intro him a little bit more later. And then some singers who've been working on the platform, Jamulus from Nosnaree Singers in Kildare. Thankfully, their conductor, a singer, and their technical experts are joining us this evening, so I'll welcome them a little bit later as well. And then we're going to tie into Q&A and get to a lot of the questions that have come in. I just want to make a broad point around, sorry, I'll just go back to here first. A broad point around frustration, and the frustration across the sector that we hear about all the time at Sing Ireland. And we feel it too. We are absolutely making our best endeavour to make representations for the sector to get people back to singing safely. We have to keep everyone's safety in mind when doing that, and actually really importantly, obviously, we have to follow public health advice on that. I think as a broad point across society, we all need to make decisions about what risk is acceptable was working within public health guidelines, and going forward, maybe in a backdrop where this virus will be with us for maybe longer than we all expected, how we can get back to activities and what risk is acceptable, what is not. And that goes again to the risk that we talked about in previous sessions, from the individual to the organization to society and so on. I just want to mention we have had a survey out to the sector, and I wanted to share some stats we're getting from that. You can see from what's there that predominantly we've received responses from community choirs, a very small number of professional choirs. We have youth choirs, children choirs, semi-professional choirs, gospel choirs, and so on, and then a whole series of other types of choirs there. And that's the kind of response we're getting. And some of the findings were coming out. I think this would be interesting for people to get a sense of what other choirs are doing. And it actually wasn't what I entirely expected. So I think it's really interesting to see what we're getting back. But we asked people what they were doing or planning to do in the coming term, and we had 21% of respondents saying that they would return to full in-person rehearsals or try to when that's possible. Then we had return to smaller groupings or mini or choirs or sectionals was about 14.8%. And then a blended learning approach was 17.2%. Online rehearsals only, 24.2% were responding that that's what they would do. Some were saying nothing at all. We had 20.3% they've chosen to take a break. And then others were unsure. So it's quite a spread across to see what people are doing and what they're choosing to undertake. And what I think we would hope to do today is give some clear guidance around digital tools in particular, and then face-to-face interaction. We're really happy to field lots of questions on that, so we'll come to that towards the end. Just to give a broad overview again from the survey as to what sort of tools are being used across the sector. You've got lots of online tools. You've got the a cappella app, which is great for virtual choirs and so on. And then lots of other tools there, from MuseScore on the music notation side and Sibelius, through to the likes of Jamulus, which we'll mention later. And then for sharing music, you've got Dropbox, you've got Google Drive and so on. And then for creating, you've got GarageBand and all of those various tools in between. Again, we'll make this available afterwards, so if there's anything in there that you hadn't looked at, you can maybe investigate it. But we wanted to give people an idea of what they were looking to. In there as well, you'll see online tools. There are some repertoire from, say, the Kodai Hub that is being used, and also from Nikos and others that people are looking to. And I think we'll always try and share that kind of thing so that people can get ideas for online rehearsing. This is a very large grouping and not exhaustive. We couldn't include them all, but just to give a sense of what the concerns of the sector are. Singing groups talking about their concerns at the moment. So obviously, there's from the public health side, you know, if they are engaging in face-to-face singing, are they going to spread COVID? Are they going to be safe? Are they going to be, is their health going to be okay? And can they spread that to others? And then, you know, if they aren't meeting, how do they manage the online, which is so tricky in certain respects? And how can they stay connected? How can their singing groups survive? How can conductors maintain their livelihoods? You know, they're all really important and live issues that we're very aware of. So I'm at this point just going to go briefly to the guidelines we've set out before. I'm going to put them up, but I think what I'll do is revisit this a little bit later rather than speak for too long now myself. So I'm going to pass to Lily, if that's okay, just to share that video I mentioned from Dr. Declan Costello, talking about some of the findings from the PERFORM study, and then we'll get straight to Tom Doyle after that. So Lily, when you're ready, I might ask you to share that.
Here we go. Can we see that okay?
Yes.
Perfect.
I do see in my clinics with singers, I do see a reasonable number of centered around choirs in the United States, in Europe and elsewhere, and there were deaths associated with that. Now, it wasn't clear at that time why exactly the COVID had spread so voraciously in those groups. Was it because of the singing? Was it because of poor ventilation? Was it because everybody was sharing drinks or hugging each other at the end of the rehearsal and so on? None of those things were very clear. But as a consequence of those clusters of COVID, public health authorities around the world decided to lock down singing. Public health doctors work on the basis that if there is a cluster of disease, you shut down the source, work out what the problem is, and then you can perhaps open up afterwards. And singing having been identified as a possible source for the problem, it was shut down very rapidly. Now, on top of that, wind and brass instruments were also singled out as potentially dangerous. So wind and brass playing has been in the firing line as well, and hence all of our instrumental colleagues have really struggled to get back to performing. I was in contact with a number of friends who are singers, choral directors and so on, and it became quite clear quite quickly that we were going to need to do some research to look at actually the extent to which singing and wind and brass playing was dangerous. If we were going to persuade the government that they would be able to lift some of these very tight restrictions on singing, we were going to need to do some research to objectively demonstrate what the issues were and whether there were any genuine dangers here. So we decided to look at the amount of aerosol and the amount of droplet that is produced in these situations. Now, just to explain, aerosol are the very tiny fine particles that come out of your mouth or come out of your instrument, and they're so light that they just float in the air, and those things, the aerosol won't go away until it's ventilated away by a breeze or by a bit of machinery. Droplets, on the other hand, are the slightly larger particles that come out of your mouth and fall onto the floor about a metre or two in front of you. So we, in a very rapidly put together bit of research with the team in Bristol, an aerosol team in Bristol, and with some other colleagues, we put together some research looking at the amount of aerosol produced by singing, by speaking, by shouting, by wind instruments, and a whole variety of different situations. And this is the paper that was published on the 13th of August. It's been published in pre-print version, which means that it hasn't yet been peer reviewed. It needs to go to a scientific journal for them to evaluate it, so there may be some changes that come through as a result. So here you see the aerosol team that did the research looking at this. We start with the Bristol aerosol team. Flo Gregson is the principal author on this, the first author, but the lead of that team is Professor Jonathan Reed, who is an aerosol specialist of national and international reputation, and Brian Bazadek was also on the team from Bristol. We have Natalie Watson, who's an ENT surgeon and also a singer, colleague of mine, and her husband Chris Orton is a respiratory doctor and a PhD doing his research at the Brompton Hospital. So we very rapidly got this team together to look at how much aerosol was produced by singers and by wind instrumentalists. And you see here what the experimental setup was. Essentially, you've got a cone that is drawing air through it, and as the person is speaking, shouting, singing, coughing, doing what they're doing, it's drawing all that air through and counting the number of particles and measuring the size of those particles as it's going in, so that we can quantify, is actually shouting any more dangerous than singing? Because if it isn't, then we need to think about how the guidelines are framed. You see here also a horn being tested and a flute, because various instruments have been suggested as being dangerous to use. So here's the conclusions. Again, preliminary findings, because they haven't yet been peer reviewed, but essentially what we see is that the louder you shout, the louder you sing, the louder you speak, the more aerosol you produce. And actually that is a huge effect. From the very quietest speaking to the very loudest shouting, there is a 20 to 30-fold increase in the amount of aerosol you're producing. And that's true of speaking and of singing, 20 to 30-fold increase. Now the question is there more aerosol produced by singing or by shouting at equivalent volumes? And the answer is that they are very roughly similar. There is actually more aerosol produced by singing than by speaking, but that difference between those two pales into insignificance compared with the huge difference between quiet singing and very loud singing. And you can see that on this graph here. You can see that we've got charts showing speaking happy birthday at quiet, mid and high volumes, and charts showing singing happy birthday at quiet, medium and high volumes. And we measured these, by the way, with decibel meters, so we were pretty sure, pretty accurate about the exact volume at which people were speaking and singing. This has generated a massive amount of interest around the world. I mean, really completely unexpected from our point of view. We've had reports from all over the world, from New York to Australia, a lot of interest in the press in this country as well. Clearly there's a huge interest not only from singers and instrumentalists, but also on the professional side, but also on the amateur side as well. People are absolutely desperate to get back to their choirs. So how are we going to reduce the risk of COVID transmission amongst choirs? Well, singing quietly all the time is not really an option in most scenarios. Now, there are some forms of musical singing production where actually you could afford to sing a bit quieter and have a microphone and amplify yourself. But actually, if you're a choir where you're reliant on a range of dynamics from pianissimo up to fortissimo, amplification just isn't really an option. So you need to think about other mitigating factors that can reduce the potential for transmission of COVID. And that would include things like being in a bigger room. Cathedral would be a great example, for example. Better ventilation. We know that ventilation is absolutely key. The quicker and more efficiently you can blow these aerosols out.
Okay, guys, we're just going to stop there, and I'll hand back to Dermot then to kind of put in context what we've just heard from Declan in the Irish context and our guidelines.
Yeah, and we're getting into risk mitigation measures there, and because we covered that quite extensively in our last webinar, I'd point you to that if people are wondering what they can do to mitigate risk. Just on that topic, a couple of questions were coming in from some who maybe hadn't seen the risk assessment webinar, and just to say there are guidelines and a checklist and all of those kind of things in our template for suggestions on risk mitigation measures that might be taken. If you should find that quite easily on our website. If you can't for any reason, just email us at any stage. We'd rather you don't struggle to find it, and we can email it to you if necessary, but you will find it there. But info@singireland.ie is the best address for that, and we'll send that to you. I'm going to pass now to Tom Doyle, if that's okay, Tom. And just as I mentioned before, Tom is a lecturer in conducting at CIT Cork School of Music, and he has been working diligently throughout the lockdown and so on with students, but also with community groups on how they can respond to working in an online environment. And Tom is going to share some of his learnings from that. So thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you.
Hear it. Oh, we can.
Oh, there we
Thanks.
go. I'm doing my quiet inside voice. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Doyle, and over the past 2 months, I've been working with a project choir on Zoom to find out best practice in online choral environments. The choir itself is part of a larger initiative entitled Creative Arts Practice Online, or CAPO for short, which aims to examine the ways in which digital tools and resources can be used to enhance our current practice. The project is funded by CIT's Teaching and Learning Unit with the support of the Department of Musicianship and Academic Studies at CIT Cork School of Music. This evening, I would like to share some of the insights, thoughts and ideas we gathered along the way, with the hope that they might prove useful to those who are considering or being made to consider digital alternatives during the weeks and months ahead. Just to give a bit of background, the project choir ran for 6 hourly sessions during July and August of this year, and was made up of a mixture of singers and conductors from a variety of choirs across Cork City and County. Initially, a total of 57 people signed up, with the choir operating on a Dido basis. That is, that members could drop in and drop out on rehearsals as per their availability, and this meant that attendance varied at each rehearsal from about 20 to 35 participants. The choir rehearsed 8 unison songs from across the repertoire, everything from Schubert to Herbert Hughes to Ivor Novello, and in order to receive feedback, participants were polled on a variety of issues. I led from the keyboard, singing loudly and proudly, much to the annoyance of my neighbours, with all the participants equally given a gusto, albeit with their microphones muted because of Zoom's current technological limitations. So, what did we discover? Firstly, the need to establish a regular weekly slot, probably as close as possible to the original rehearsal time. Singing online is a new skill and it will take some time getting used to. Initial tries are sure to be cumbersome, glitchy, and seemingly unproductive. And it also doesn't help that our society is rapidly getting used to and expecting things to be immediate or on demand. Choral singing, whether in person or online, does not happen at the click of a button. If ever you find yourself disheartened by the process, just cast your mind back to when you first picked up an instrument, or learned to sing, or even stood in front of a choir for the first time. These things take time, commitment, and perseverance, but the rewards are worth it. Designate a block of time, see it through, and then review. For those leading rehearsals, set aside some time to record yourself going through the various microphone options, so with the original sound on and off, experimenting with noise cancellation and external mics. Once you have narrowed down choices, also check in with others to be absolutely sure. What may sound great on your set of speakers might not work as well for someone listening in on their mobile phone. I actually found myself that using the original sound with my laptop mic made the sound worse. I'm actually working off an external mic at the moment. Because of the new medium, it may be an idea in the initial stages to play it safe as regards repertoire. Perhaps sing through some pieces that the group are well used to and enjoy before moving on to something more challenging and new. Do send music in advance, either a couple of days or ideally a week before the rehearsal. There will of course be those singers who won't look at the music until the day of, but others will take the time to read through or perhaps listen on YouTube or Spotify. I generally typeset the vocal lines into Sibelius, or alternatively you could send word sheets if your choir is more used to that format. Choral singers like to chat. Why? Because choral singing is just as much a social activity as it is a musical activity. And with that in mind, do ensure that you prepare for and set time aside for what may seem like unnecessary chit-chat. With the project choir, I opened the room about 10 to 15 minutes before the rehearsal, which allowed members to congregate and strike up their own pre-rehearsal conversations, just like old times. Except back then they were catching up on a week's worth of gossip, now we were talking about several months. And even if that's the goal for your first session, just to get everyone online for a quick chat, I believe it would be a step in the right direction. So now just moving on to some findings that we found in rehearsal. Keeping in with the social element of choral singing, if possible, do ask that members keep their cameras on. For conductors, it allows you to read the room in much the same way you would in person. It's also a handy way of learning or relearning people's names. Of course, some members of your choir might not be entirely comfortable with having their camera on, so I would suggest strongly recommending, but not insisting. We found that the ideal length for a rehearsal was somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes, which corresponds to a standard session or a first half if your choir schedules a break in its rehearsals. However, conductors should note that there will be extra stamina requirements when rehearsing online. A time period that seemed fine in person might be more taxing when on Zoom. Why? One possible reason I could offer is that conductors spend, or should spend, a lot of their time listening during rehearsals. In a Zoom environment, of course, this doesn't happen to the same extent, and so conductors are tasked with filling the void with further direction or singing. Take the time to know your limits and work from there. If it's any consolation, I found that the pace and momentum I would usually adopt carries over into the digital realm. The project choir were happy with the speed I was taking the rehearsal, so there wasn't a need to go faster or slower than I normally would. In trying to keep things as close as possible to the real thing, make sure you incorporate warm-ups, even if it is just a short singing session or a sectional. I generally start with posture exercises, so stretches and rolling the shoulders backwards, before moving on to breath work. Here you can also introduce mindfulness exercises, giving people an opportunity to draw their focus and attention into the Zoom room. This is probably more important now, given that people are singing at home or in work environments. They simply don't have the same escape, as it were, traveling to and from the rehearsal room. And then finally, tonal exercises, working with small intervals and ranges if you're in the early stages of restarting rehearsals. Linked in with this is the need to continue encouraging good tonal production. This is nothing new. We do it all the time in rehearsals, creating space in the mouth, releasing tension, focusing and projecting the voice. But during the course of our sessions, we discovered that local environments were impacting and influencing tonal production. Most participants admitted to either singing louder or quieter than normal. The latter probably as a result of not wanting to upset fellow family members as they caught up on the latest episode of Corrie or EastEnders. Of course, this is easier said than done. Some home environments may simply not be conducive to good singing, but aim to provide that constant and reassuring encouragement. And of course, on the flip side, some of the issues that we found. One of the greatest issues was that of sound quality. This, of course, will vary from singer to singer depending on the equipment they have. But if I could offer one recommendation, it would be that participants use headphones rather than rely on the speakers of, say, a laptop or a tablet or a mobile phone. Personally, I find that there are less volume issues and less time spent straining to hear what is being said or sung when using headphones. As regards internet connection, if you're working off the home Wi-Fi, try and get as close as you can to the router to avoid any communication issues. If your Wi-Fi connection isn't great, perhaps experiment with hotspotting through your mobile phone, but of course be aware of the data usage this might entail. Zoom, for some reason, currently does not have an automatic update facility. You still have to manually go into your settings and check for updates. The most recent one, 5.2.2, which I believe was only rolled out a couple of days ago, includes a high fidelity music mode in the advanced audio settings. I've yet to try it out myself, but it's certainly an interesting development. As previously mentioned, we had 57 people sign up, but only half attended the rehearsals on a weekly basis. This could have been due to the drop-in, drop-out policy or the fact that it was the late summer, but poor attendance seems to be a common thread amongst those running online sessions. Do take the time to speak frankly with your choir and discuss whether they want to move online as an interim measure. This has to be a collective decision between singers, committee, accompanist and conductor. And this is where I throw the choral cat amongst the pigeons. A decision not to move online is equally valid depending on your choir and their circumstances. Waiting it out could be as beneficial as attempting in-person or online rehearsals over the next couple of months. Who knows? For me, the jury is still out. I touched earlier on the idea of social interaction and the need to include some elements of it online. People do miss the act of coming together, the art of assembly, as it were. The breakout rooms feature could be just as useful for stimulating brief conversation as it is for organising sectionals. Harmony is sorely missed too. Some ways of getting around this might be to pre-record the lines, mix them together and play this during a rehearsal. Alternatively, and whether this could be managed safely, is the idea to gather a small subsection of the choir, say just the line leaders, along with your accompanist and conductor, and run a rehearsal with the rest of the choir joining in online. It's not ideal, but in keeping the actual contact base small and useful, it's a potential halfway house, especially for larger choirs. Having an attainable goal or purpose is extremely useful for maintaining motivation. In the past, such goals have been concerts or performances or competitions. More recently, choirs have tended to focus on creating recordings or virtual choir videos. I think it's important to say that making the move online does not mean you have to create an end product. Not everyone has the capabilities, skills, or even the spare time to make one of these complex videos. Choose a goal, if you can, that works for you and your choir. Okay, some good news of some of the successes. Why are online rehearsals beneficial? Because they get people singing again. Maybe not in the way that they were used to, maybe not in a way that initially seems productive or useful, but at a fundamental level, people are coming together to sing. It's not perfect, but it's something to counter the absence of group singing. There's no travel, there's no waiting on buses, and there's no parking. That said, we did wait the customary Cork 5 minutes to allow everybody to arrive into the Zoom room. I didn't miss having to stand over the photocopier, printing off reams of paper and making sure everyone had a second copy. I could simply forward on a digital score that members were able to print off or view on their various devices. And speaking of devices, the choir was able to operate using the resources and equipment it already had. Admittedly, some of the improvements meant that I had to invest in new equipment, but for the singers themselves, they were able to use whatever they had to hand, whether it be a laptop, a tablet, or a mobile phone. The lack of peer pressure also gave comfort to those singers who in a normal rehearsal might have felt hesitant to sing out for fear of putting off their neighbours. One of the initial questions I asked the project choir was whether they would be comfortable in contributing financially to online rehearsals. At the end of the day, revenue prefer cash to virtual choir videos. The vast majority said yes, they would be willing to contribute, though understandably at a lesser rate to in-person rehearsals. I might dwell on this particular issue of accessibility because I think it's certain to be an important element in future choral practice. One of the participants in the project choir had been a regular singer with a local group here in Cork. A year or two ago, this particular singer had to stop attending because of health reasons and personal circumstances. Seeing and hearing about the positive impact that the online choir had on this singer was truly heartening. Here was someone who was passionate about choral singing, yet had been isolated from the experience well before Zoom and COVID-19 had entered the common vocabulary. As we progress forward, we might be mindful of those people who, for whatever reason, are unable to attend in person. The option of virtual choirs or blended experiences means that we have an additional means as well as the potential to connect with a wider audience. Just before I finish, just some useful add-ons. Zoom has the option to stream out to YouTube and Facebook. It might be handy for those singers who are more comfortable with those mediums. Clicker Desktop is an app that allows you to control a PowerPoint presentation from your phone rather than having to use a keyboard. And this might be particularly useful if you're using on-screen words for your PowerPoint presentation, similar to a kind of karaoke session, like I'm kind of doing now, and aren't in a position to be near your laptop or a computer to select the next slide. Finally, Google Maps has the potential to add a further visual element to your rehearsal. I'm just going to duck out of this. Here we are in the real capital. Sorry if I've just offended everybody outside of Cork, but there you go. It's the rebel in me. We sang a arrangement of the Garton Mother's Lullaby, arrangement by Herbert Hughes. Some of you may have already sung this, originally from County Donegal. So we'll zoom up here. Just outside Letterkenny is Garton. And this was a wonderful way to be able to connect not only with the geography, but being able to drop the old gingerbread man there on the side of the lake. Beautiful view. Let's turn around. Let's go down the road. So again, if you're working with, say, a primary school or in an educational context, being able to see the scenery around, look at the colours, you know, and the scape. This happens not only here in Ireland, but say you're singing an international song, you immediately connect with the location, with its geography, with its features, and with its colour scheme as well. An idea to add to your rehearsals. And finally, thank you very much. Thank you to Dermot and Lily and all at Sing Island for organising this webinar. If you want to find out more about the CAPO project, you can visit csm.cit.ie/CAPO. And if you wish to email me personally, my email address is thomas.doyle@cit.ie, and welcome any questions over the coming days or suggestions, or if you just want to tease out ideas, we'd be delighted to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Tom, and thank you for your insights there and for the findings from that project and to hear about all your work. Thank you so much. There are a lot of questions that are kind of coming as we go, but I'm just eager to move on maybe to another aspect and to discuss Jamulus through Nás na Rí. So I might go straight there and then we'll revisit questions. in general after that point. I think as a intro to this next section, I suppose we're looking at Zoom, which can be quite limited in terms of the ability to sing together. And Jamulus is a platform, an open source platform that with a little bit of work and a little bit of investment financially, time and finances, but not debilitatingly so, I think. But I'm going to pass over to, we have three representatives from Nás na Rí here, and we're so grateful to them for taking the time this evening. We're going to hear from Anne-Marie Caffrey, who's a singer in the choir, and we'll start out, I think, and then she'll be followed, I'm not sure in which order, but by Nathan Barrett, who's the conductor of the choir, and by Stephen O'Reilly, who is the mastermind to their technical abilities here, I think. So really grateful that he can be with us. So I'll pass over to Anne-Marie first to give us an idea of working on Jamulus. I think you're just going to need to, you're unmuted there now.
Hi.
Anne-Marie, thanks.
Thanks, Dermot. Good evening, everyone. My name's Anne-Marie, and I'm a regular choral singer with the Nás na Rí Singers. I love being in a choir, singing with others rather than on my own, and I've been in choirs forever and would be enthusiastic, committed, and loyal to the whole experience. So tonight I speak for myself about how I have found Jamulus as an experience and how it has enriched my musical life since lockdown. The thought of actually not being allowed to sing with others was hard to process and accept, and alien to my world. Some sort of solution had to be found for singers around the world to give us an outlet for our expression. The main reason I love to sing in a choir is for the feeling it gives me, that magic tingle when all the individuals open their mouths at the right time and hopefully make a magic sound, giving colour to those black dots, collectively breathing warmth and soul into it, making it an actual living thing. And that's why I like singing in a choir and why I was on the hunt for that special feeling in whatever was available in the virtual world. So, possibility one, virtual choirs and home recordings. In our case, we all recorded homeward bound individually in our own homes, and then the tracks were expertly combined for the choral effect. It sounded great and is there for all to hear forever, but it just wasn't the same as actually singing together in real time. Then possibility two, Zoom. Zoom was heralded as the be-all and end-all for the lockdown communication problem. Unfortunately, this technology proved not to be the holy grail for collective singing. Meetings and quizzes showed up the failings with dropout, clashing conversations, and frozen chat. During a Zoom catch-up with our choir, we tried singing happy birthday to someone, but it was a bit of a disaster. And that was more of a failure of the technology rather than the singers themselves. Choral workshops via Zoom proved to be a one-way thing, with the guidance and advice coming from the helpful conductor, and then each of us singing solo, karaoke style, for no one to hear. Enjoyable, but no tingle. So early in the summer, I was asked by Dell, would I be interested in trying an old but new technology which was used to facilitate jamming musicians? And it was now being used for singers. Aren't singers musicians too? I asked. Anyway, the jamming could happen in real time over the internet. Social distancing wasn't a problem, so it was worth the shot. Possibility three, Jamulus. So equipment was needed to be purchased. I held my breath. I didn't have a clue what the outlay would be, but I was relieved to be told that for less than €100, I would be adequately equipped to take part. Of course, I said yes and hoped it would be money well spent. A bit of time was needed to download software, and Stephen expertly guided me and everyone else through the setup steps. Then the time came to actually sing, and I was so excited and delighted. I had my headphones on and boom, my ears and brain were filled with familiar voices and harmonies and heart, and the social connection was back. We use Zoom still just for the visuals at the same time, but for me, it's all about the audio, hearing the accompaniment, the cues, and the other singers, and it all knitting together. As a singer, as everyone knows, normally, but especially in Jamulus, concentration is key, keeping the beat. At the start, it takes a bit of work to realise that each person has to take responsibility for their own part, singing for themselves, not waiting for others, which drags the tempo. Sometimes we've used a metronome and it has been handy at times because the conductor on Zoom isn't in real time, he's just minutely behind us. So to ease us in at the start, we practiced familiar pieces that we all knew so that we could concentrate on the new skills of adapting to the technology and the whole experience. But we also have managed to learn new pieces following the scores so that we can read what's happening, even if some of us don't actually read music. And actually the technology is there to virtually split the choir for split rehearsals and to bring everyone together again. And Stephen can talk a bit about that later. So we all know that music does much more than just put us in a good mood. It energizes our mind, eases stress, evokes emotion, and it soothes the soul. After the Jamulus sessions, I felt my batteries charged, as they would feel after my real choir practice. It feels like a real practice requiring preparation, patience, concentration, attention, rhythm, accuracy, dynamics, blending, adjustment, and commitment. Really, you get out of it what you put in, and it can only make a choir better and stronger in the long run, consolidating confidence and accuracy for when we get back together in real time, in real life. So last Monday night, we sang And So It Goes by Billy Joel, a piece which was new to us a few weeks ago, and it sounded just gorgeous. It's not perfect yet, but it's well on the way. And when we finished the piece, you could hear singers saying, "Oh, that was lovely." And normally remarks like that after singing are lost in the back row amidst the shuffling and all that, finding new music. But we could hear them in our headphones and our hearts were happy, and I could get that magic tingle. Thank you, Jamulus. Thanks for joining. Thank you. Wish you the best of luck with it if you try it. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anne-Marie. And that was terrific. And to hear that personal response to it, I'm not sure if I'm going to Nathan or Stephen next. Who is it? Nathan. It's Nathan. Yeah. So Nathan, conductor of Nos na Rí Singers. Off you, when you're ready.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dermot. So I suppose just to follow on from what Anne-Marie says, if you haven't sort of guessed or if you're not familiar, I'll just give you a brief overview of Jamulus itself. I'm by no means a tech expert, and if you have any techie questions, you really need to be asking Stephen. But just from my point of view, I'll give you a brief overview of what it is, what it looks like, and then just from my point of view as a conductor working through a rehearsal on Jamulus. So Jamulus itself is, as I've said before, it's an open source software, and the main key thing that it does is it gets rid of most of the latency or delay that you experience when you're singing with Zoom. So you are able to sing with 4-part choirs. You're able to have that harmony. So from our point of view with Jamulus, I was on board from sort of mid-July with Jamulus. I came on board for a week or two. Other members had been doing testing and had been working with the software. Stephen and Adele, our chairperson, had done a lot of work in the background, researching and getting us up and running. So I joined in July, and from there I listened in on a few rehearsals, and I think it's important to point out that it does take a week or two to, once you have your software, once you have your audio set up, to just listen to the rehearsal, see how it goes, and see what the sort of etiquette and procedures are around online rehearsals, as that's quite an important thing, which we'll come on to in a few minutes. So I listened in, and I was blown away really, because from my point of view, the big thing with Zoom and things like that is the delay. It's next to impossible to do anything meaningful with people on Zoom when you're only just hearing yourself. So then I started taking rehearsals, and I have a keyboard plugged into the computer and microphone all plugged in, and it's like doing a normal rehearsal, really. So I suppose, just from my point of view, some key points, I've split them just in some key points here. So the first thing is, once you have your software set up and you're ready to go, the next question would be musical choice. Do we immediately start learning new music? I would say no. I think in the likes of listening in at the start to the first few weeks, if you're new to Jamulus, that's important. And also for the first few weeks of a rehearsal would be to go over music that everyone is familiar with, because it gets you familiar with how the technology works. It gets you used to, there's very little delay, but it's not perfect, but it gets your ear used to it. And once your ear is used to this delay, very slight as it is, you're ready to go. So we would start with warm-ups as usual with every choir rehearsal, physical and vocal and breathing. And as Anne-Marie said, we have Zoom as well, so not only can we see, but we can hear each other as well. So warm-ups and then rehearsing. So new music, as Anne-Marie said, we've been working on, and so it goes for quite a number of weeks. And but new music. I think that's one of the main fears, I think, for a lot of choirs is, are we going to be stagnant here now for the next couple of months? Are we going to be able to do new music? How do we work towards a concert maybe we have planned for next summer? Hopefully on the horizon, that might seem like a possibility. And the fact is that it is the same. We run lines, we teach lines, we have taught lines through Jamulus in the same way that you would, either your conductor would sing it or play it on the piano, and everyone can sing it back. And it's uncanny. It's uncanny. So I suppose from a rehearsal point of view, it is an extremely useful tool. I think the next best thing is in person, which isn't possible at the minute as far as I'm concerned. One of the key issues with Jamulus, I suppose, is of course it's not completely perfect, is the balance of singers. Every person has what looks like sort of a little mixing panel on their screen when you open up Jamulus, where you can adjust the volume of all the singers. However, the thing is that not every singer's volume is going to be the same on my laptop, on Anne-Marie's laptop, or on Dermot's laptop. So it does take a bit of adjustment to get your levels correct. And my advice, I think, for that is that during the warm-up period, the first 5, 10, 15 minutes of your rehearsal as you're warming up, that you personally adjust your levels. So if your basses are singing too loudly in your ear, you turn them down. If the tenors are singing too loudly as usual, you turn them down as well. The altos are too quiet, turn them all up. Okay, so the balance is personal to you and personal to each person in the choir as well. So there's no master control that, I can't just turn down all the people and that's going to be the same for everyone. A couple of other things, just as we lead into using Jamulus, is the phased entry. I know a couple of people have asked what sort of numbers we have, and I think that's a key issue as well for larger choirs. Currently, the last rehearsal, I think we had around 20 to 25 at our rehearsal, and we're planning on introducing more people over the next few weeks. We're not planning on getting 50 people in the choir signed up and ready to go for next Monday's rehearsal, because then you have 50 people brand new jumping in on, and it just takes time. So I think the key issue with Jamulus is time. Okay, it will take, a week or 2, 3 to get used to the software, to get it set up. And once you're set up, it is easy to use. Okay, the software itself is very simple to use. It is a couple of clicks and you're ready to go. Once you have your equipment set up, I know Stephen's going to talk about that in a minute. Once you have your equipment set up, it's set up and it's there to go. You don't need to be adjusting anything week by week. It's simply almost plug and play, as people might say. Finally then, I suppose the last thing would be rehearsal etiquette. As with your normal choir rehearsal, if you arrive late, you don't come in and draw attention and start shuffling and asking where we are, what piece we on, what bar in the Hallelujah chorus are we starting at here. Okay, you come in, you sit down and you get your stuff out and you're ready to go. And it's the same with a Jamulus rehearsal or an online rehearsal. If you're late, people are late for whatever reason, and they come in and they just listen for a few minutes, get themselves sorted and come back in, because I think the online is even harder to manage than in person, as I'm sure we all know. I think a key thing as well for online learning for choirs, I'm going to stop talking now in 1 second, is just the benefit of the education that we're all giving ourselves chorally as well. I think we're learning so much about ourselves as singers, as conductors or directors, simply because we're in the room by ourselves. So there's no bluffing, there's nowhere to go here. You're on your own, but then this software brings everyone back together, I feel. So I think that's all I was going to say. Happy to take questions at the end or whenever. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Nathan. That's brilliant to hear your perspective on it. And I'm going to go now to the technical aspects, which I know Stephen will try to lead us through. So thank you, Stephen O'Reilly.
How you doing, folks? First thing I want to say is thank you to Sing Ireland for giving us the opportunity to share this with you. I've been working with Jamulus and European Jamulus Choir since the beginning of April. The link that I just after posting is a presentation we did with a couple of other choirs also using Jamulus throughout Europe. The choir that I was in stretched as far as Sweden, and we managed to stay in time. I'm going to paste the main points that I want to cover rather than share my screen. And I'm going to fly through them. I'm not used to talking to so many people, so bear with me.
No problem, Stephen. I was just going to mention that's pasted into the chat, just in case anyone didn't notice that. But sorry to interrupt you there.
No, that's fine. That didn't quite paste quite the way I wanted it to, but you'll get the picture. Jamulus is a piece of software that does one thing, and it does it very well. It allows us to sing in real time with singers on the far side of the continent with very low latency. I saw a question there, do we use Zoom? Yes, we do use Zoom, but that's just for visual and for expression. We cannot rely on Zoom, as the picture that we see is going to be at least a second to 2 seconds behind everything else. Jamulus prerequisites. What you need to do, we need to do every one of these, otherwise Jamulus won't work very well. We need the software, we need the latest version. The current version is 3.5.10, and that has been tested with the server capacity of over 80 people. Next week, it'll be 3.5.11. I was working with the developer last night testing code, and I believe he will be able to get it to over 100. So watch this space. You need an audio interface with a native ASIO driver. The UMC22, which we're using, is only €41. It's worth every penny. Can't hear me.
We can. We're okay. I think we're going to try and help Joe to hear again, but he was having an issue there, I think.
Okay, the UM2 is €33. It's a little bit cheaper. I can go into details, technical details, why all of these are important, but I can already feel your eyes glazing over. You need a reasonable quality microphone. The XM8500 that we're using is only $16.50. You need a good, stable internet. Somebody said something about it being unstable on Windows. It's actually not. ASIO for All is unstable on Windows. Jamulus is very stable. The good internet quality you need is a good round trip time. I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to do a quick test to show you what a good round trip time is.
Just while that's sharing for you, Stephen, I just might mention, because I'm a layman on this stuff as well, that the audio interface is a small little hardware device you get, and it's a really good one that you're pointed to there. And we're going to share the links to where you can get them. Stephen's showing it on the screen there. Yeah, but we'll share how you can get it and exactly where to purchase it from it if people are interested in that. We'll do that, and primarily Thomann is the best place for that, Stephen tells me. So we can now see your screen, Stephen.
I'm just showing you a basic DOS screen which you can run up from the command prompt. I'm pinging 8.8.8.8. That's one of the Google domain name servers. I'll ping it again, and if you look at this column here, that's the number we're looking at. 6 milliseconds, 10, 7, 6, 6. what we need for Jamulus is a consistent number. If you get something that's jumping all over the place, like 6, 16, 12, 24, 30, 40, that's where you're going to have your problems. Anyway, I want to move on to the next point, so I'll stop that. That's what a good internet, if you don't get a good stable ping, get onto your internet service provider, because they're not providing you what you're paying for. It only runs on Windows, Macintosh, or Unix. It does not run on mobile devices. You have to have wired headphones, no Bluetooth. It has to be an Ethernet cable. For somebody who's gone through the notes I posted, that's RTT. Ethernet is a shorter RTT round trip time than Wi-Fi. Your computer needs to be in high power mode, not power saving or any other economy power. I'm running out of steam here.
This is great, Stephen, and I think you were nearly to the end of that list, and my takeaway from it is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, if that's okay, but my takeaway was that there is an investment of about €100 required, and that is per person, and that obviously may be prohibitive for some, so we're not negating that. But if you are to do that, there's the audio interface, there's a good quality microphone. A UM2, I'm afraid I didn't, a UM2 is what exactly?
It's what Joe and Valerie is holding up. I'll show you my one again.
Oh, okay, so that's the interface, effectively.
Yeah, I'll talk you through it. That's an XLR input.
Yeah.
That can double as an instrument input, because there's a same as this is an instrument input, and that's a headset output. Okay. You got 3 volume controls on the top. Your mic gain, upside down. Your mic gain is the first one. Your second input is the second one, which we don't use for the singers, and that's your headset output. Okay, once that is set correctly, the rest of the room won't be disturbed by you having too loud or too quiet. That's the first learning experience, and that's just what you hear. The interface you see when you look at Jamulus is your mixing desk for balancing everybody else in the room.
Fair enough. Can I ask a question there? So the UMC22 that's in your list is €41, and then the UM2 is 33. So you can pick one or the other, but presumably the UMC22 is better. Is that right?
It is marginally better. The 22 has a lower noise floor.
Yeah, and then secondly, a good quality microphone, and you've pointed to the XM8500. Great. And then just for those who aren't, and I'm a bit of a layman on this stuff, I have to admit as well. So the Ethernet cable is when you ideally would have your laptop, and that's plugged directly into the router, right?
Yes, the maximum spec on a Cat5 cable is 90 meters. You're not going to reach that in any house. So long cable trailing through the door, doesn't matter. Just don't stand on it.
Yeah, so
that's one, Joe. Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there anything else? I just jumped in there, so I understood right, Stephen. And is there anything else you wanted to add there?
I'm looking at the questions coming in. UNC goes to the computer by USB. USB mics don't work. You need to have a native ASIO driver. And the driver we're using is a custom driver, and I'll put that link in the chat.
Great. So what we'll commit to doing as well as Sing Ireland is we'll put together a one-pager on what to do with Jamulus. There are also, if I'm right, tutorials online for setting up Jamulus, right, on YouTube, I think. So we can try and have a look at what might be possible, but also take your expertise on that, Stephen.
There are many experts out there. Unfortunately, the technical documentation on the author's website isn't tip-top. You gather the information from different sources and make it work.
Fair enough. So look, we'll put together a one-pager on our best how-to as to how to do it, and then probably have to link out to other information. It does take time, it does take effort, but what I'm hearing is it is worthwhile doing. And I think nobody is saying that that this option is better than face-to-face or should be considered if face-to-face is possible. It's just something to consider for choirs in the absence of that, or in the longer term to complement the work that they would do face-to-face. So I think that's really the important point there. And thank you again to Stephen, to Nathan, and to Anne-Marie for their time and for really giving us that experience of Jamulus. We will follow up with all of this so you can look at how to do it. There are lots of questions coming in. I might pass to Lily now, if that's okay, just to field some of the questions that have come in. And just before we do that, I just want to say that we have focused on the online predominantly. And just to make that point again, Sing Ireland's focus is trying to get people to a point where it is safe to sing and where they can do that together in a way that is going to, be as safe as possible. However, I do think it's important. I'm getting, as in my position at Sing Ireland, and Lily gets often saying, oh, look, we don't want to do the online thing. And that's perfectly valid, and absolutely people are entitled to do that. But actually, I just, we wanted to present some options that are there at the moment and that will give you those experience, and not just for this time where we can't meet together, but also as ways you might complement your work later on. So sorry, Lily.
Okay, so bear with me, guys. There's been a lot of questions coming in thick and fast, so if I miss any, I apologise. If there is any that I do miss, do feel free to email us and we can ask the relevant people and come back to you with the best answer we can. Okay, so I'm going to work backwards here. So just in regards to Jamulus. Can you use Jamulus if you're using mobile data if you don't have Ethernet cable?
No, you won't get a stable round trip time.
Okay, that's a very straightforward answer. Thank you, Stephen. Can you set up a private server specifically just for your choir?
Yes, you can. You just don't have to publish it on the central server. I have my own chain of servers. Two in Dublin, London, Netherlands, Finland, Frankfurt.
Short answer, yes.
Yes.
Short answer, yes. I think we can probably put a little bit in the information sheet on possibly how to do that or where to go looking for more information, because I'm sure that's not a straightforward answer here and now. Can you do breakout rooms with Zoom and Jamulus to do sectionals?
Yes. Just stay in the same server and solo the parts that you want to listen to.
Okay, thank you. And how did you find accessibility for it with older members who may not be as confident with technology?
I took that one by the horns. I knew we had a wide demographic in the choir, and I installed them all myself on TeamViewer.
Okay, so it is accessible with a bit of work.
Once it's set up, anybody can use it.
Perfect, thank you. I suppose this is a question for both Tom and Nosnary, so whoever wants to take it. How did you find your members were after a long day of working at home and online work and Zoom meetings and the fatigue that we're all feeling at the moment?
Nathan?
I was going to say Tom. Does Tom want to go first? I suppose, I think it's like, our experience of using Jamulus, I suppose, slightly different to Tom, but our experience was like every choir rehearsal, you go to choir rehearsal, whether you're in person or you're online, you've been to work during the day anyways, and you've been sat in front of the computer, you've been doing whatever, you're tired. But I think it's the whole thing of that's why we go to choir, isn't it? Because this is something that's going to re-energize us. This is what we enjoy doing. This is our hobby. This is something we're giving our time for. So I don't think something like being a bit tired after work is going to put most people off. I suppose, the main thing is that a lot of people nowadays are sitting in front of the screen all day anyways. So I suppose it's the thought of sitting in front of the screen again for another 2 hours. But I suppose it's probably better that it's the computer screen, singing some music, than the TV screen, because I suppose that's probably the other option then in the evening. And so I think the singers are energized because it's been such a long time since we actually were able to sing together in such a way that it's exciting initially, for sure. But it's a thing we love doing, and it's a thing that, you know, no matter what we had to do, we got back into it, and this is where we are.
Okay, Tom?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that too. I guess for us, if people were tired, they probably didn't show up, to be very honest. But I think a wonderful thing with choir rehearsals, and especially like I'm working off Bluetooth headphones with this, is that you can stand up, you can move away from the screen, you can, you know, even if you just want to focus hourly on it, and you're not focusing necessarily on a conductor and keeping in time. Maybe putting warm-ups or exercises just to get out of the seat throughout the rehearsal, as opposed to just at the very beginning, might be a way to energize, just in the same way that you would do in an in-person rehearsal. But you know, I would echo Nathan and say that, you know, hobbies seem to have an extra energy button, you know, that people like to exercise there. So.
Okay, I suppose that leads us back to Dermot. And a big question that came in towards the beginning, is group singing in person always going to be risky?
Well, that's a very big question, but I think group singing is not risky. COVID and the contraction of COVID is what is risky. The risk is greater when people sing loudly. That's now being proved in research data. And how do you sing in a group when it isn't something that you're doing loudly? Will singing always be risky under COVID situations? I would say the answer is yes. However, we can reduce that risk, we can mitigate against that risk, we can make it as safe as possible. And then the broader point I was making earlier around, you know, we as a society, we as a people have to decide what is possible, as long as we're following public health advice, what is possible, what is safe, and how much risk are we individually willing to take. And then to counter, I see some other comments coming in, you know, people saying that for instance, 99.99% of people will not get COVID or not be affected by COVID, and that's a valid point. But the public health advice and the system within we're working is setting aside that this is a danger that our society has to address. And I think what's important then is to decide what risk are we willing to take, and then we are advocating certainly that singing is the risks regarding singing have to be looked at in a very sober way, just to look at what are the risks, how can we mitigate against them, and how is that comparatively more risky or less risky than other activities, and other activities that people are already back to are equally risky. So we have to make those decisions as a society and as a choir and as an individual. So it's not that we want to put out that singing is risky. I see another question there around masks at primary school. Absolutely, they don't need to be worn. It was just an extra preventative measure. Officially, there is no mask recommended at primary school level, and we aren't going to go against that. However, any extra mitigating factor for risk is what we have seen internationally will help. So PPE has been proven to help, masks do help. However, that doesn't mean we're going to say to people at primary school they shouldn't do it. I was just mentioning it in the context of that masks make things that much safer. It doesn't mean it's going to be mandated.
Dermot, if you wouldn't mind showing the last slide of your presentation again, I think it would answer a lot of questions that people have just in regards to guidelines, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, it'll take me a minute just to share that. There were some other questions there. Yeah, I think just while I'm sharing this screen, I noticed a question around the size of church and church singing in particular. Do you want to mention what those are, Lily, as I share the screen? Because I know we were clarifying that.
Yeah, no bother. So I'll basically start at the beginning. So as Dermot said, singing groups are subject to 6 people indoors and 15 people outdoors. We can confirm that they are not subject to 3 households. Okay? I know that's a big question a lot of people have been asking. It is not subject to 3 households. In terms of church choirs, this is actually based on individual circumstances. We have been told that you're not subject to the 6 and 15, but it is up to your individual church to decide whether they wish to have a choir or whether just a cantor. Now, obviously, with your choir, you need to have your risk mitigation, you need to do your risk assessment. It also depends on how many people are in the congregation, how many people are allowed in the church, and so on and so forth. I hope that clears up a lot of questions people have.
Yeah, just on the numbers broadly there, just to draw that out a little bit, I think it's 50 in churches, but it can be smaller and bigger than that depending on the size of the church and the overall that the HSE are setting out. The churches can have a slightly larger number. You know, for instance, a large church, you know, the Pro Cathedral in Dublin or Christchurch Cathedral or St. Finbarr's in Cork or wherever, they have a larger area, so there's more possibility to do it a bit more safely, I think.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So, I mean, you may see groups returning in whatever way works for them, but bear in mind what works for them may not work for you. Their situation would be different. So just do take a step back and reassess your own situation would be the advice. And if you have any queries at all or you want any clarification, don't hesitate to call us or email us. We're just a phone call away.
Great. And there are a lot of other questions I know coming in all the time. In relation to, sorry, I'm just seeing this last question from Micah Dawson. Is there a blanket guideline for all choirs, or do the restrictions vary based on the group, i.e. children's versus a high risk older age choir? The public health advice doesn't specifically rule out or rule in certain groups. However, it says that we should take account of at-risk individuals. So there isn't a guidance around whether an age group can sing together or whether any considerations like that have to be taken into account. However, we would say that along with the public health advice, people need to consider the makeup of their groups, pre-existing conditions, all of that kind of thing. There were also a lot of questions around singing in schools. Again, I just want to come back to it because we had a lot of questions around that. You know, if you have a group of 25 people sitting in close quarters in a classroom and they're speaking loudly at one point, then in all likelihood, the singing will be a similar level of risk to that. So I think each teacher and each school has to decide with those risks in mind whether they're going to do it or not. There are very specific guidance at second level that says 10-minute sessions and then strong ventilation through the rooms. So we need to get fresh air into the rooms because those small aerosols can't move by themselves. They will not move by themselves. They just gather and gather. And so the only mitigating factor we can bring into it is if we let ventilation through the room. And Lily, are there other questions that we have missed there? I know there are, but is there anything you wanted to?
There's one just there about masks, and I was just in the middle of replying with a message there. It's not a straightforward answer in regards to mask. What we have heard is that what works for one person doesn't work for another. So our advice is go home, try different masks, see what works for you, what doesn't work for you. A mask should ideally be 3 layers of material. Sometimes with a filter if they're homemade, excuse me. And other than that, we've heard surgical masks are the easiest to sing in. There's a lot of research being done on this at the moment, and we will share it afterwards.
Again, do keep in touch with us as much as possible. We are at the moment trying to work on short, sort of clear guidance as much as we can. Our frustration, the same as yours, is that the guidance changes on a regular basis. And so we try to give as much information as we can and then issue the guidance as soon as we know what is definitely coming out. We're advocating all the time that singing groups are being considered. I have to say up to this point, I haven't felt that they have been overly considered. I think going forward, there is a sense that they will now start to be properly considered. We aren't alone in that, by the way. I think the arts and cultural sector had been left behind a little bit, certainly in the last restrictions that were announced. They were almost entirely, not mentioned. And I think in a way that's worked in a positive, in that unfortunately that had to happen for it now to be taken a bit more seriously. And I don't think that will be the case with future restrictions, but we'll stay in touch with everybody to let you know what the latest is in relation to restrictions and so on. So are there any urgent other questions there, Lily, you wanted us to get to? I know there are many others. We will try and come back by email to anything we haven't answered there. I know, lastly, I just wanted to mention that there is a deep frustration that we can't get back to face-to-face singing for conductors, for singers, for groups, and they are real concerns and real issues. And we are in no way saying, I just want to say it again, we are in no way saying that the digital route can replace it, but there are some good options coming all the time that will help with that. One other quick thing I wanted to mention actually in relation to digital tools is we've mentioned on previous webinars, Digital Stage. That is still in creation. They're still putting it together, but it isn't really usable at this point, just in case anyone was wondering.
Dermot, they're just hoping to have it fully ready by the end of the year, all going well.
Great. So look, we had intended to finish up actually at about 1:15, and we've gone a little bit over that now. So thank you very much to everyone. Thank you to Tom Doyle, to Stephen O'Reilly, to Nathan Barrett, and to Anne-Marie at Mosnaree. Thank you to Lily as ever. And I think, are we going to do a Mentimeter? No.
Sure,
Lily?
Why not? Let's do it.
Sure,
Bit of crack.
So
ready to go out.
Thank you. So the Mentimeter is just an online tool for us just to get a quick caption of people's thoughts. Stay if you can, and Lily will share that with us. Other than that, thank you again so much for being here.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just share a code that you guys can all open either on your phones or your desktops. I'll stick it in the chat box as well. So you'll see up the top of your screen, go to menti.com and use the code there, and then you'll be able to just give us a little bit of feedback about how today went. And as Dermot said, thank you all for joining us. And the camaraderie among the sector is something to be proud of. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And something I forgot to mention actually a bit earlier was just to keep an eye out for a very practical session on conducting that's coming up on Saturday at 12 o'clock, a free session with Orla Flanagan, which is a refresher on conducting basics. We'd love anyone who is interested in that, and particularly conductors obviously, to sign up to that. You can find that information at singireland.ie. But thank you all very much for everything, and we will stay in touch because things are ever evolving. And will we unmute and have chaos for a minute? Why not? Let's do it. We'd love to have singing, but we'll, as the same thing I'm saying at the end of these, but let's have unmute and we can just bring the session to a close. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Amelia.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye
bye,
everybody. Very, very informative. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
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 See you in the pub.
Bye.
Pint of Guinness.
Thank you very
Thanks for all
much.
your hard work.
Thanks for that. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.